Welcome to After Six. As you've been hearing, Democrats are doing their Democrat thing. And we're going to talk to not just a Republican, but the Senate Republican who is the avowed conservative. There's a lot of Republicans who play conservative and will sometimes assume conservative positions, but they're also quick to fold and compromise and go along to get along, but not Rob Sampson, who just went into the Senate, took over Joe Markley's seat in Southington, and he was in the House before. And it's great to have you elevated, and it's great to talk to you, Rob.
Thanks very much for the opportunity, Todd. I appreciate it, and thank you for the very kind introduction also.
So fill us in on some of the crazy stuff that it looks like is coming down the pike. It's early still, but the bills are being proposed, and we do have a different dynamic in the state politically where Democrats, the more left-wing Democrats, are empowered to pursue any kind of crazy stuff. So what's your feeling of where things are heading?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things in that last statement. There are certainly bills being proposed, so we're starting to see the agenda of the Democrats begin to take shape. But to your point, there are a great many new legislators, both in the House and Senate. The Progressive Caucus in the Democrat Party is growing. I think they have over 50 members now. I think their leadership is not quite sure how to handle that. I expect there to be, different factions fighting for different issues within the Democrat Party. But more than anything, I think you have a lot of new, very progressive liberal Democrats who want to show off to their constituents and to the rest of us that they were elected to push a very, very Democrat socialist agenda, and I think they intend to. And they haven't been quiet about it. You've got Senator Alex Bergstein out there, basically trying to convince everyone in the world that we need tolls. You've got Senator Martin Looney, who's, the president of the Senate, has been around for a long time, came out with some very controversial proposals in the last couple of days about regionalizing school districts. We've got bills on everything from early voting to banning straws and plastic bags, taxing sugary drinks, and I don't know. If I think about it, I can probably come up with some more.
And what's interesting about them all seems to be that they're not responsive to the condition of the state.
Absolutely. I mean, to me, it's obvious that the policies that Governor Malloy and the Democrat majority have put in place over the last 8 years that I've been up there watching very closely have damaged our state's economy and have forced certain businesses and what I would consider producers in our society to move for greener pastures in other states. The only way forward, Todd, is to grow our state's economy so more people are coming here, doing business, producing wealth, and therefore the revenue to operate our state's expenses. And it seems to me that they are just stuck in spend and tax mode, and I think it's going to do more damage and not ultimately fix our budget problems.
Yeah, well, they're not coming forward with an overview of what the state's needs are given the financial crisis, and to some extent that will take shape, at least from the governor's point of view, when he gets his budget in and lays out an agenda of how to fix the state. I assume he's going to at least create the impression that he's got a formula for how to fix the budgetary problems and the debt problems and all that. But whether he has actual policies that can make that happen remains to be seen. And the reason this period I think is important, and the reason I wanted to flesh it out with you, Rob Sampson, is because these things they're proposing, some of them will make things worse and make it harder. Certainly doing things that burden business or send signals to businesses that you don't want to be here. Things that say to middle-class workers, you know what, you thought we were crushing you before. Wait till you see what we've got up our sleeves. That's going to drive more people out of the state. How does that, right there, how do you even surmount that if that's what they do?
I don't know that you can. I mean, and that is the grave problem that we are faced with in the state right now. I am very, very interested to see how our new governor reacts to all of this. I'm curious to see if the policies putting forth that we just mentioned are ultimately parts of his budget plan going forward. I mean, is he going to try and to balance the budget on new revenue streams from marijuana and tolls and sports betting and things like that? Or is he going to take another tact or approach altogether? I still don't really know, but I suspect that the Democrats in the legislature are going to have enough power to force his hand in many ways, even if he's reluctant to do so.
That he will have to do certain things, at least, to get them on board with his agenda. He'll have to do some horse trading, perhaps.
Right. I think, it's really hard to get a read on Governor Lamont. Sometimes he gives me hints that I should have some faith that he's a reasonable person who's in a position of accountability. He understands the grave nature of our economic circumstances. He understands the damage done to the economy by the Malloy administration over the last 8 years, and might want to take a different stance. But on the other side, I know he's being pressured by the Democrat leadership that they're going to do tolls, they're going to do family medical leave, they're going to do $15 minimum wage. These things in a different environment might be more reasonable policies, but as you stated, Connecticut's economy is declining. It is clearly unwelcome to the business community. You've got to send a different message that says, look, we're not going to put more on you right now. We're going to make it easier because we want you to come here and provide jobs and grow the economy.
Yeah, so I don't even know if the thinking that you've been doing about what his direction is, what Lamont's direction is, I don't even know if that's the thing to be thinking about, because it's really more about, say he wants to be rational as you can be, when you're the head guy in a party that is at its most left-wing place. What do you, how do you reconcile the fact that you're in this party that has these expectations, that has as a big agenda item the $15 minimum wage, exactly the wrong kind of policy at the worst possible time? How do you deal with that?
I have no idea. And I don't know that we even have an example of what happens in circumstances like this. I mean, the closest thing I could think of is if Bernie Sanders was elected president, for instance. But thankfully that did not happen. Who knows? I really don't know how they're going to balance the budget, even on paper, given the incredible size of the immediate deficit and their supposed desire to want to address our long-term obligations, which I don't know how you even do that given the financial circumstances we find ourselves in. I mean, the budget is always a calculation of expenditures versus a revenue number, which is an estimate. And, that's very helpful when you're trying to balance something on paper, because you can predict that the economy and the state's revenues are going to grow. But I think that's just dishonest on its face at this point, especially if we're going to put more impediments in front of businesses. I don't know what's going to happen, Todd. I really don't.
All right, so let's talk
specifics. We're going in the wrong direction. And go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, let's talk specifics and see what we know is happening so far. For example, there has been a lot of legislation filed. Any legislation filed or any discussion thus far about things in the budget that could be cut in order to help balance the budget?
I have not seen any proposals from Democrats that reduce spending in any area whatsoever. There's quite a few Republican proposals, including my own, to eliminate various state agencies, combine things, eliminate programs. The Citizens Election Program that pays for campaign materials, for instance, the Board of Regents of Higher Education, a number of state agencies that can be modified or reduced or eliminated in some way. I mean, we need to start looking at these things, and we need to find ways to meet our long-term obligations, pay off the pension debt that is piling up, which ultimately is going to be paid by future generations if we're not careful.
All right, well, let's go through your ideas. That's a really good idea, since you're a conservative and you may be one of only a couple in the whole legislature. We're talking to Rob Sampson. He's a new senator, took over Joe Markley's seat, and has been in the House. So why do you want to get rid of the glorious idea of taking money out of politics?
You mean as far as elections goes?
Yes.
Well, first off, because I don't think it's the right thing to do with the taxpayers' money. I think that people that run for office should do things the old-fashioned way and encourage people to voluntarily donate to their campaigns. There should not be a system set up where taxpayers are being taxed for the purpose of money going into a fund that can be distributed to candidates. That is not a reflection of how popular they are or whether or not they should deserve the attention that they get. And even worse than that, what it does is it allows the state government to have influence over the distribution of those monies and control over how that money is spent.
Yeah, well, certainly that's a good idea. But there is the perception, at least, that there's a problem with politics, and that is that people getting elected are beholden to special interests because they depend on special interests to write big checks. Is that not your perception of politics, having been in it for a few years?
No, actually it's not. I think there are certainly areas where, elected officials, legislators, feel that they have a responsibility back to the folks that helped them get elected. But in Connecticut, we are limited pretty dramatically in how much money we can receive from an individual contributor. And you can leave that system in place. I might want to increase those limits. Right now, I think it's $100 is the maximum contribution that someone can give to someone running for state representative and $250 for state senate. That's a pretty small amount of money. If you're willing to sell your soul and vote, against the will of your constituents or your own conscience over $250, you're in the wrong business. I constantly make this point, Todd. People point to a lot of, things that they see as solutions to fix these problems of controlling special interests, but really it comes down to the person themselves. There is no amount of money that is going to change me or get me to vote against the will of my constituents or my conscience. There's no amount because I'm a principled person, and that's what we need to do is elect principled people.
Yeah, but I think the way it works is there's a sort of coercion that goes on. If you, certainly in Washington, and maybe it just doesn't exist at the state level in the same way, at least in Connecticut. But if you look at what happens in Washington, that people tend to get put into a bubble of their side. And if you're playing for your team in the way people want you to, or maybe you're in a subset of your team and you're always there supporting certain things, and those industries that want those things depend on you, and they, as a result, you get big campaign donations. There are certain things that might come up where you say, it's this thing that I disagree with, I'm going to go along with because, I give them 90% of my votes anyway. I can't fight them on this one. And why would I put my career at risk? All this infrastructure, essentially, that I've built. You don't see those kinds of pressures on legislators?
I do not. I think there are a lot of different pressures on legislators, but I don't think that the actions of different lobbying groups have any real impact on it. And you can see it. The left tries to create these imaginary ties. I have a very pro-Second Amendment voting record, for instance, and they will try and say that I'm bought and paid for by the NRA. But the reality is that I'm the one calling up the NRA saying, we have to stop. There's Democrats proposing this legislation that is going to infringe on the Second Amendment. Can you please help me? That's a more realistic characterization of what's happening. And I think that more than anything, legislators are influenced by the reactions of their constituents more than any lobbyist ever could, because lobbyists, they don't vote. It is the people in their district and their reaction to the policies and votes that the individual legislators take.
Why then? I think if you're listening to the news and about politics, and they talk about how lobbyists are swarming and how something got slowed down by pressure from lobbyists, we hear these kinds of references all the time. Is it not realistic to think that those people with all that money are I don't know how they couldn't be getting a product, how they'd be spending all that money and not getting anything in return?
Well, certainly, there are lots of different, sources of power and influence, and not having served in Washington, in Congress, and being subject to those same types of pressures, maybe I don't have a real accurate picture of it. But I think in Connecticut, the only people really subject to that type of pressure are Democrats who serve in jurisdictions that are overwhelmingly Democratic, where the Democratic candidate is certain to win. The center of Bridgeport, New Haven, et cetera.
So then they have to fit him into the piece of the puzzle they need.
That is correct. And, the state employee unions have a great deal of power to weigh in on those things. And you really do have to kind of toe the line. The thing is, I don't really think that they are being pressured into those positions. I think that they, more often than not, share those positions. And, they don't need to be influenced.
Well, yeah, I understand that, but I also know, having grown up in Massachusetts and seen the transition there from there being, with the Democrats having lots of conservatives and being a conservative party in a lot of ways, to there just being a smattering. But there is that smattering, and I used to do a morning show in Boston with a guy who had been Speaker of the House. So he was a very powerful guy in the state, and I was amazed to learn that this Democrat I was co-hosting was the most conservative human being I'd ever met. Social conservative, hardline, old school conservative Catholic. And nobody knew that about him because he was the leader of the Democrats. And leading the Democrats meant he had to lead the entirety of them and not represent his own views, but represent the views of the party. So there are these pressures that exist for certain people that maybe you're so ideological and always have been that you've kind of taken yourself outside of that paradigm.
Yeah, I think that's right to a significant degree. But also, as we said in Connecticut, we do not have the same kind of forces because lobbyists are limited very much so in their ability to, provide gifts or influence to individual legislators. I think the limit is $35. So they can maybe take me to lunch once in, an entire, term or something. I mean, I don't think that's the kind of thing that's going to really do anything. Businesses are prohibited from contributing to political campaigns. Yeah. Only individuals are allowed to. So, I mean, we have some rules in Connecticut which really make it hard for that type of influence to exist. But at the end of the day, Todd, I understand everything that you're saying, and it certainly exists. But there is pressure coming from all kinds of places in politics. The pressure of your constituents, even though they might actually be ignorant to the facts behind a bill, it is what is out in the news media that is telling them, all of this Trump influence in the last election, all that kind of thing. It all plays a role, and it's your job to stand up and make sure that your voice is heard and that your constituents know where you're coming from. Legislators that are unable to do that because they are either afraid to go out against the grain or because they don't have confidence in themselves to be able to put their positions forward, those are the ones that are susceptible to influence from their leadership and other sources. And that's really what you have to fix. You need to elect people that have strong principles that you trust. And I put that back on our constituents. Our constituents really need to hold their legislators, their elected officials, accountable. If there's one thing wrong with what's going on in politics in America, it's because people are not paying attention to what's actually happening under their nose.
Okay, so one of your proposals is to get rid of public financing. What else are you pushing for?
I know that elections are going to be a big deal this year. Even listening to your show, I know there's a lot of concern over what happened in the last election with regard to fraud because of the advent of Election Day registration in Connecticut. Well, the Democrats are pushing to expand that even further. There are proposals out there to do Election Day registration at the polling locations, which, aside from being a huge expense, I think also opens the door for lots of different types of fraud. They want to do no excuse absentee voting. I am trying to counteract those policies by not necessarily fighting them on the notion of making elections more accessible to people, but I want to make sure that the integrity of elections is paramount. So I have bills in to audit the results of Election Day registration, to audit absentee ballots, to require a photo identification at polling places, things that will actually push back on the ability to have less than perfect elections.
You want to keep elections sound. Rob Sampson is a new senator. What else? Any other thoughts you can think of that for proposals that you have?
It's difficult when you serve in the minority. I put in a lot of bills to let my constituents know where I stand on things.
Yep.
And what I'm going to push for. But you realize as a member of the minority that most of those things are not going to go places.
But I think it's important that you do that you put them on the table, and that other people on the other side have to decide not to support them and to vote against them.
Absolutely. I mean, to me, that's the most important thing that Republicans should be doing right now is making sure that we are pointing out that there is a difference between the people that are up for election and the direction they want to take the state. And that's the way to do that, is by putting your ideas and your policies on the table for people to understand the difference.
Did you hear that the CEO or former CEO of Starbucks, Howard Schultz, is contemplating a run for president as an independent? This is out of left field, but I was just curious if you had a reaction to it.
I had not heard that till you just told me, and it doesn't surprise me. I think that the turmoil that's happening in our state, in our country, is based on the Democrat Party being co-opted by people that really don't like America or our core values and principles. And that is why the divide keeps growing and growing and growing. And I heard you mention something the other day, which I thought was really keen and on point, and that is that the differences are now irreconcilable. And that's really the problem. It used to be when I was growing up, my whole family were Kennedy Democrats. The Democrat and Republican parties were very similar. They all believed in the same core values of freedom and opportunity as Americans. And today, it's a totally different story. We have Republicans trying to hang on to those values and Democrats trying to create more government programs, socialism, identity politics, things that tear at the fabric of America. It's not surprising we can't get along and that there's no compromise.
Yes, we shouldn't, given the ideological differences and given how far out of whack the country is in relationship to the principles that we were founded on and that made us great, and that I think most Americans, even if they say they want health care, they want a free Medicare program, Medicare for all, even if that sounds good to them, it's probably because they haven't thought it through and don't realize that the idea is patently against the ideas that America was built on.
I'm so glad you said that, because that's exactly how I feel also, and I'm forever trying to convince my Republican colleagues who are concerned that they might have to moderate their positions to appeal to their voters, that they shouldn't do that. What they should do is be out there explaining to the voters in their districts exactly what it means to be a Republican, why our American values are so important, and how they are the right way forward to fix our state and our country.
No, I'm so glad that's what you tell them, because the reason we're in this fix is because everybody says, oh, I'm on the losing side, I have to go along. Well, if you tell people your reasons, if you bring them through the logic, the worst that can happen is they're going to disagree but respect you.
I couldn't say it better.
All right, Rob Sampson, thank you so much for your time, sir. Let's, I liked I like this last couple of minutes. I think we have to get down to talking about these principles in our next session together, okay?
Sounds great. I look forward to it.
Senator Rob Sampson, thanks for joining us on After 6. That's it for today. Stay with us and listen to the news, and then Clark Howard coming up.